Good, yeah. Good morning again. It's good to be with y'all. And as I did talk to you about with the kids there, our message today, our sermon, our scripture that we're going to be looking at, and where we're going to be going, is going to deal with grief. And it's fitting that this is a Memorial Day weekend, and it's a time in which we honor those who gave up their life for us, for our freedoms. And we all, whether we have someone that we know that served in the military and who gave up their life or not, we all have experienced grief. And how are we going to deal with that grief? And that's why the sermon today is titled "Good Grief, Overcoming the Grief Gap." Good grief, overcoming. It sounds like something out of Charlie Brown, I know, but I think if there's anything that we need to put our minds around, put our hearts around, is how are we going to deal with grief? How are we going to deal with sadness? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. The statistics are in, and 10 out of 10 people die. So that's a pretty sure thing right there, And so that means that death is going to be a part of our life. Death's going to be a part of who we are and what we know and the things that are around us. Therefore, we got to learn how to deal with it. How are we going to process it? But at the same time, we should view death as an intruder, as an enemy, as unnatural. It's not what God had intended for His creation. And we'll see how God deals with it in our scripture today. We're going to be talking about the story that's found in John chapter 11, verses 1 through 44. And this is the story of Lazarus. Now, you'll remember the story of Lazarus, probably. It's a pretty familiar one, maybe. And what takes place in this story, just to summarize, to begin, is Jesus is away, and he's out with his disciples, and he gets word that Lazarus, his friend, is sick and is dying. And then he waits 2 days, it says, the scripture says. He waits 2 days before he returns, and he finds, he knows that Lazarus is dead. And then he talks with the two sisters of Lazarus, Mary and Martha, and they have a conversation. And that scripture that I referred to with the children there falls into this story, where when Jesus sees their mourning, he weeps. And then he comes to the tomb, and we all can see the picture of Lazarus there standing before the tomb, as Jesus standing before Lazarus' tomb, as he calls out for Lazarus to come forth. And Lazarus then miraculously comes out of the tomb, raised, and everybody's grief is sort of washed away. It's sort of turned into joy. Well, we know that all of our stories of grief don't exactly end in that way, but they do. They do end in that way. I've been talking as I do Bible study with the youth, about something that's very important. When you study Scripture, it's important to look at the meaning of the text. The Scripture has one meaning, unless it's intended to have two, but by and large, Scripture has one meaning, and it's there for a purpose. And we can't just assign meaning to it. We can't just bring our own meaning to it. And the meaning of this text, well, first of all, is it's a historical account. It's something that happened. This took place. But more than that, why did John choose to include it in his scripture? Why did he choose to include it in his gospel? Well, this picture here of Lazarus' resurrection shows forth the glorification of Jesus. It's Jesus being identified here. This is the crowning mark, as John has tried to paint a picture that Jesus is the Christ, that he is God with us, that he is God in the flesh. And this account here is sort of his crescendo, if you will, up to the fact of that matter. And then it's also a foreshadowing. He puts it in there, and it's pretty clearly as you read it that it's a foreshadowing of Jesus' own resurrection, of what will take place soon, and how he will come again. But just like the text has a meaning, it also has applications, and it can have many applications. And how we're going to deal with it today is along the lines, we've talked about the meaning that it deals with his resurrection, but we're going to talk about its application today. How can it apply to your life, and how does the things that are present apply to your life? Well, obviously, the meaning there applies that we should look to Jesus as the resurrection. He is the God with us. But it has more than that in that how he deals with grief. How is he dealing with grief in this text? And so that's what we're going to use this text to do today. We're going to talk about grief. You know, you probably, if you've studied psychology and things like that, you've probably heard of what's known as the 5 stages of grief. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her book On Death and Dying, labeled 5 stages of grief. Now, she came out to say that these are not necessarily stages as if some people want to make it that you have to progress through each one through another until you get to the last one. So it's not necessarily stages like that, but they're responses to grief. And I want to use this idea of how we respond to grief to talk about this scripture today. And the 5 stages of grief are, of course, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. You know, typically I don't put a lot of stock into psychology because it's often, theoretical in nature and secular in nature. It's easily influenced by the whims of our culture, and it changes kind of on ebb and flow. But these stages are more like observations. And in that way, I think we can learn something from it. And we'll see how the people around us respond and how we respond as well. So we've been talking about in here about bridging the gaps. And we're going to use that today. We're going to use this idea of bridging the gaps with grief as we look at these different responses. Because the gaps are created in our response to loss. When we experience loss in our life, gaps are then created. And we grieve because of this loss that we feel. So let's go through these different stages and talk about how they relate to our scripture. Denial. Denial is the first stage that I want to talk about. Well, denial is essentially me saying that my loss didn't happen, or that we're trying to continue on as if nothing has changed. You know, one might think that this is what's happening with Jesus here, that he's in denial that his friend Lazarus is dying. When at first glance you might see that and say, well, he gets word and he just acts like nothing's wrong. He acts like nothing's changed. Why didn't he pick up and go? I mean, is he in denial that this is taking place? But when we do the math, we realize that that's not the case. Jesus gets word and he waits 2 days, like we've said. But then when he arrives, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. So Jesus knows that Lazarus is dead, and we know that he knows that he's dead because he tells the disciples before he leaves that he's dead. If you look there in verses 11 and following, it says, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up." Then the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will get well." Jesus, however, was speaking about his death. But they thought that he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus then told them plainly, "Lazarus has died, and I'm glad for you that I wasn't there, so that you may believe. But let's go to him." So Jesus stays away, not because he is in denial, but because he wants to make sure that it is without a shadow of a doubt that Lazarus is dead. So that there'll be no other explanation for his resurrection but the fact that God did it. Denial is not a healthy stage. It's not a healthy response to grief. But to be quite honest, we often make choices as if we're in denial of our own mortality. We must live with the truth, and that truth is found in Hebrews 9:27 and 28. It says this, "And just as it is appointed for a man to die once, after this the judgment, so also the Messiah, having been offered once to bear sins of many, will appear a second time, not to bear sins, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. The truth is that we have one shot. We've got one life to live, and after that comes the judgment. When we live like there's no consequences, we live in denial of the judgment of God, and that the judgment of God will come for us as well. When we talk about the second stage of anger, anger is the fact that sometimes we get mad. We get mad. We get mad at everybody. We get mad at a certain somebody. We get mad at God when we experience loss. You know, in the scriptures we're looking at today, it doesn't say that Mary and Martha are angry at Jesus, but one might draw that conclusion that they might have been. But we'll talk about their reactions in a minute here. But did you ever notice who it did say was angry? Jesus. 2 times it says that he was angry. Look there in John 11, 32 through 40. It says, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who were come with her crying, he was angry in the spirit and deeply moved. Where have you put him? He asked. Lord, they told him, come and see. And it says Jesus wept. So the Jews said, the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, couldn't he who opened the blind man's eyes also have kept this man from dying? Jesus was angry in himself again. It came to the tomb. It was a cave, and the stone was laying against it. Remove the stone, Jesus said. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, Lord, he's already decaying. It's been 4 days. And Jesus said to her, didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So who's Jesus angry at? Mary? Martha? The mourners? No. He's angry at death itself. Death is an intruder. It's a product of sin. Romans 5